Grace to and peace from God our Creator and Christ our Redeemer. My dad has always been something of a news junkie. When he was working, that interest was largely focused into his job. But since retiring a couple years ago, that interest has been channeled into texting me a steady stream of links to news articles and websites. In fact, if you were to look at our text message chain, it would consist almost entirely of website previews with an occasional question stuck in. It starts early in the morning. I often wake up to a news article from him on my phone. And then they continue to trickle in throughout the day while I'm at church, running errands, or otherwise going about my daily life. There was already one this morning, in fact. I'll be honest, it's more than I can possibly keep up with, and out of necessity, many of the stories go unread. But when I have some spare time or a story catches my attention, I will read a few. Which is how it came to be that about a year ago, I opened a link he sent me about solar panels or something. I read the first few paragraphs, scrolled through the rest of the page quickly, and then wrote back to him, "Dad, this article was entirely written by AI." A short time later, he sent me a link to a video featuring a man seated and speaking while looking directly into the camera. I watched it for a couple of seconds before writing back, "Dad, this video was also entirely AI generated." "What?" he replied. "How can you tell?" I'm not surprised that he's getting pulled in by the AI content. It isn't his fault. The internet is now a sea of AI-generated images and videos on social media and entire pages of websites that were not typed by any human fingers. It has gotten to the point that it is sometimes hard to find human-generated material. I was recently trying to look up an answer to a relatively simple question about copper pots. I opened the first answer that popped up in my search engine, but after reading a paragraph, realized that it was AI content. I went back to the search results, opened the next site, only to find that it was also AI generated. Alerted now, I went back to the search results and looked carefully at the list of sites and realized that all of them had indications that they were also AI content. I clicked through to the second page of results and concluded that they were even more AI content. Frustrated and a bit disgusted, I closed the browser. I did not find my answer. Now, that disgust I feel is in part, admittedly, a point of professional pride. In this line of work, I value what is human and what is real. But it's also practical. So often, AI content just isn't good, especially in the ways it's used by websites for dubious search engine optimization practices. My dad wanted to know how I was able to identify the AI content, and the answer is that it so often involves using a lot of words without saying very much. The point of the content is alluded to over and over again, but you never quite arrive at it. Or to put it more subjectively, I find that when I read this AI-generated content, my eyes glaze over and I keep having to go back and reread the same sentence or paragraph over and over. And when I stop and really look at the words, I realize it's because they are devoid of meaning. They are empty of truth. Because that is the problem with so much AI content. There is no truth to it. And I'm not just speaking of its propensity to hallucinate answers that are verifiably false. Each word that follows the one before is simply the result of a very complex analysis of the most likely word to come next, a statistical mediocrity with no capacity for surprise or insight. And now it's so prevalent, we are so awash in a sea of stochastic noise that it leaves us wondering, what is real? What is true? What is truth? We might be tempted to say that truth is the objective reality in which we all live. But in recent years, it has become clear that we do not share an objective reality to which we can all agree. So instead, I'd like to offer a slightly broader understanding that truth is that by which we make sense of the world around us. In the past, that was largely through the exercise of reason, philosophy, science, and even the arts. More recently, we increasingly come to our truth through politics. The growth of terms like fake news and alternative facts are signs of the way that politics have become instrumental in truth-making and points to a world where differences in politics are not differences in opinion, but entirely different realities. Whatever you may think of this change in how we arrive at truth in the modern world, what all of these methods share in common is that they are accessible to us. That is, we can think or reason or feel our way to some truth through them. They are truths that I, as a regular person, could arrive at myself if I were so inclined. What they also share is that they are incomplete. They are truths that allow us to see only in part. Jesus is standing before Pilate, having been arrested and found guilty of a capital crime. As Pilate questions Jesus, we hear him trying to arrive at the truth. And he is seeking this truth through the application of reason and his understanding of power and authority shaped as they were by the Roman Empire. And as Jesus questions Pilate, because in this story it's not always clear who is on trial, we see Jesus point to a truth that is wholly different and foreign to Pilate. But Pilate could not understand because the truths he used, the human truths he leaned on, only allowed him to see and hear in part. But Jesus came to be a witness to God's truth. And God's truth, unlike the truths we cling to, cannot be found through reason or art or philosophy or politics. There is no way that you or I could arrive at God's truth ourselves. God's truth can only be revealed. And unlike our truths, which we use to make sense of the world, God's truth gives the world solidness and form. Indeed, it was God's true word once spoken that brought creation itself into being, and it was that same truth spoken again that declared it good. As our church year comes to a close, we pause to remember that it is God's truth made flesh in Jesus Christ that has come among us to offer salvation and healing and wholeness to all people. I believe it's a reminder that we especially need now in a world filled with uncertainty and fear, because in a time when so much feels uncertain and false and empty, God's truth is real and solid and full. And in a time when we are surrounded by so much noise signifying nothing and so many words saying so little, God's truth comes to us in the sound of sheer silence, filling us to overflowing and connecting us to the ground of our being.